Beneath the noise of the world, there is a whisper, a pulse, ancient and tender. I am Waya Vespera, a voice of the threshold, calling you to listen deeper. Here we walk not by sight alone, but by the resonance of the soul. If you are hearing me, you already belong.
There are moments in human life that do not feel ordinary. Not because something dramatic happens, but because for a brief instant, the world becomes impossibly still. Maybe it happened during deep meditation, maybe in prayer, maybe in grief, maybe in exhaustion so complete that the mind finally stopped fighting reality for a moment. Or maybe it happened unexpectedly, while staring at the sky, sitting beside the ocean, listening to music alone at night, or waking suddenly from a dream carrying a silence too vast to explain. And in that moment, you felt surrounded by something. Not exactly a person, not exactly a force, not even a thought, but a presence. A light that did not merely appear around you, but somehow included you within itself. And for a moment, the usual sense of separation softened. The endless narration of the mind became quieter, and something deeper than thought whispered, "You are not outside of this." Many people have touched moments like this, and then dismissed them, psychologized them, buried them, or feared them. Because modern culture gives us very little language for encounters with profound stillness. But the ancient mystics did, and across traditions, Christian, gnostic, contemplative, hermetic, and mystical, there are recurring descriptions of encounters with overwhelming light, living presence, and a dissolving of ordinary separation. The Hebrew prophet Isaiah writes, "I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up." Isaiah 6:1. And the book of Revelation says, "And behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne." Revelation 4:2. Not many. One. Still. Radiant. And what is remarkable is this: the people who experienced these visions rarely focused on describing a location. They focused on describing what the encounter did to them. Because when human beings encounter overwhelming presence, language begins to fail. And perhaps this is why so many mystical traditions speak in symbols. Not to confuse us, but because direct experience cannot fully fit inside ordinary speech. So now, this is not merely a teaching about scripture, and it is not a lecture about theology. It is an exploration of a question. What were the mystics actually encountering? And even more personally, have you already touched the edge of it yourself? Stay with that question. Do not rush to answer it, because the throne vision is not understood by force. It is recognized slowly, like remembering something ancient that was never fully lost. Before we speak about the throne, we must speak about why human beings avoid silence in the first place. Because silence is not always comfortable. For many people, it is terrifying. We live in an age of constant stimulation. Scrolling, noise, debate, consumption, identity performance, endless distraction. And beneath much of it, there is a quiet fear waiting underneath the surface. What happens if I stop distracting myself? Because when external noise fades, something else becomes visible. The ache, the grief, the exhaustion, the loneliness. The questions we spend entire lives trying not to hear. A man once described sitting alone after losing someone he deeply loved, unable to distract himself anymore. No television, no scrolling, no conversation, just silence. And in the middle of that silence, after the tears finally stopped resisting themselves, he said something unexpected happened. Not a voice, not a vision, but a stillness so immense and compassionate that for the first time in months, he no longer felt abandoned by existence. This is why many people can sit in a loud room comfortably, but become deeply uncomfortable sitting alone in silence for 10 minutes. Because silence removes escape routes. And yet, every contemplative tradition eventually arrives at the same doorway: stillness. In the Psalms we read, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. Notice, the instruction is not become impressive, not achieve spiritual status, not perform holiness. Simply, be still. Because stillness reveals what noise conceals. And this is where the throne vision begins. Not in spectacle, not in supernatural performance, but in the terrifying and beautiful moment when consciousness stops running from itself long enough to perceive what remains underneath the noise. The mystics understood this deeply. The Desert Fathers withdrew into silence. The Essenes cultivated inner purification. Contemplative Christians practiced interior prayer. The Gnostics spoke of awakening from spiritual sleep. The yogis spoke of dissolving identification with the restless mind. Different language, different symbols, but a strangely similar direction: inward. And this is important to understand carefully. The throne vision is not necessarily about physically seeing a giant throne somewhere in the sky. It is symbolic language attempting to describe an encounter with ultimate presence, an awareness so whole, luminous, and alive that the ordinary fragmented self temporarily softens inside it. In mystical Christianity, light is never merely physical. It symbolizes consciousness, truth, divine presence, and living awareness. The Gospel of John says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." John 1:5. And Christ says, "The kingdom of God is within you." Luke 17:21. This is a critical key, because if the kingdom is within, then the throne vision cannot only be about a distant external realm. It must also point toward an interior reality. In the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua says, "The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you." Gospel of Thomas, saying 3. And this creates a profound paradox. The divine presence is not elsewhere. It permeates existence itself. In the Gnostic text, Pistis Sophia, the language becomes even more luminous. It describes realms of immeasurable radiance, and a being shining more brilliantly than all lights. The text says, "There was no measure for the light which was upon him." Again and again, the mystics reach the edge of language. And when they cannot explain further, they speak of light. Not because light fully explains the experience, but because it is the closest symbol human beings have for direct knowing. And many contemplatives throughout history describe similar experiences. Overwhelming luminosity, profound unity, timelessness, dissolving fear, indescribable peace, unconditional love, or awareness becoming strangely vast and intimate at the same time. This does not mean every experience is identical, and it does not mean every inner vision should automatically be interpreted as divine revelation. Humility matters here. Human perception is complex. Psychology is real. Projection is real. Imagination exists. But what is remarkable is how consistently mystics across traditions describe encounters with luminous presence that fundamentally transform their relationship to fear, identity, and separation. Now we arrive at the center, the one enthroned in light. Notice something carefully about the biblical visions. The presence on the throne is not frantic, not reactive, not unstable, not striving. It is still, absolute stillness, absolute being. And around that stillness, everything else organizes itself. The ancient writers describe beings bowing, realms trembling, voices crying, "Holy, holy, holy." But at the center remains something unmoving. Why? Because the throne symbolizes ultimate reality beyond fragmentation. The world of the ego is restless, always becoming, always comparing, always defending identity, always afraid of dissolution. But the throne vision reveals a state beyond psychological fragmentation, a still point untouched by chaos. And this is where the teaching becomes deeply personal. Because when contemplatives speak of being surrounded by light, many describe something surprising. The light does not feel hostile. It feels intimately aware. Not merely observed, known. And for many people, this becomes emotionally overwhelming. Not because they feel condemned, but because they feel completely seen without needing to pretend anymore. The soul weeps because it no longer has to perform separation. This is why tears often accompany profound contemplative states. Not sadness alone, recognition, relief, return. And if you have ever encountered moments in meditation where time softened, the sense of me became quieter, overwhelming peace emerged, light or spaciousness surrounded awareness, love felt unconditional, or silence itself became alive, then you may understand why the mystics spoke the way they did. Not because they were describing fantasy, but because ordinary language breaks under the weight of direct encounter. Now we must clarify something important. Both religion and modern spirituality can distort this teaching in opposite directions. Some religious traditions externalize God completely, placing the divine infinitely far away from direct experience. The result: people spend their lives believing themselves permanently separate from sacred presence. Meanwhile, some modern spiritual movements collapse everything into the self, declaring every feeling divine without discernment or humility. Both extremes miss the mystery. Contemplative traditions point towards something more subtle, not ego becoming God, nor separation from God, but participation in divine presence. In Eastern Christianity, this was sometimes called theosis, participation in divine life. It does not replace God or make us the center of reality, but awakens us into communion with it. And this aligns powerfully with the words of Christ, "Abide in me, and I in you." John 15:4. Notice the intimacy, the communion, mutual indwelling. This vision is not about inflating the ego, but about softening the illusion of isolation. Authentic spiritual encounter cultivates more humility, more compassion, more clarity, more presence, less fear, less obsession with the self, and less grandiosity, superiority, or escapism. So how do we approach this teaching practically? Not through forcing visions, not through chasing altered states, and not through spiritual performance, but through learning how to become present enough to notice what is already here. When you can, sit somewhere quiet. No performance, no need to achieve anything, just sit. Breathe slowly, let the body soften. Notice the movement of thought without fighting it. And then ask gently, what remains if I stop trying to become someone for a moment? Do not force an answer, simply notice. Maybe nothing dramatic happens. That is okay. The contemplative path is not built on spectacle. It is built on intimacy with presence. And over time, many people begin noticing something subtle. Beneath the mental noise, there is an awareness already here. Still, quiet, watching. And perhaps the ancient mystics called this awareness light, because it illuminates without force. The Trappist monk and contemplative writer Thomas Merton once wrote, "We are already one, but we imagine that we are not." And modern contemplative teacher, Episcopal priest, and scholar of Christian mysticism, Cynthia Bourgeault, says, "The kingdom of heaven is not a place you go after death. It is a state of transformed consciousness." Not everyone interprets these ideas identically. Humility matters deeply here. Yet contemplative traditions across centuries continue pointing toward the same possibility. Beneath fragmentation, human beings are capable of direct participation in sacred presence. And perhaps this is the deepest mystery of all. The throne vision does not remove you from humanity. It returns you to it differently. The dishes still need washing. The world still suffers. The body still ages. Grief still visits. But something changes in the center of perception. Once you glimpse stillness beneath the noise, you begin recognizing that the noise was never the deepest part of you. And slowly, compassion deepens. Fear softens. Performance weakens. Presence expands. Not perfectly, not permanently, but truly. So if you take anything from this teaching, let it be this. The mystics were not merely describing distant heavens. They were describing encounters with a presence so luminous and intimate that separation itself briefly became transparent. And maybe, just maybe, you have already touched the edge of that presence yourself. In silence, in meditation, in prayer, in grief, in awe, in surrender. Not because you escaped reality, but because for one moment you stopped resisting it. And perhaps the throne was never far away. Perhaps it has always been closer than thought, closer than identity, closer than fear, closer even than the voice inside your own mind. And if there is a final truth here, it is not that you must become divine. It is that you were never truly separate from the light that gives life to all things. So breathe, become still, and listen carefully, not to me, but to the silence underneath all the noise. Because sometimes, when the striving finally quiets, the presence that has always been here becomes impossible to ignore. And perhaps that is where remembrance truly begins.
What has stirred within you is not passing. It is the memory of your own wholeness. Carry it gently as a lantern for the path ahead. When shadows gather, remember, the heart knows the way. If these words find you, stay close, not as a follower, but as kin in the unfolding. Until we meet again, rise in wisdom,